Hello, Matt Easton here, scholagladiatoria, and I'm reviewing another one of Todd's fantastic rondel daggers. And this one is an earlier example than I've looked at previously. So this is end of the 14th century, so late 1300s, maybe around up to about 1400. And it is a lovely thing and demonstrates what I've said in previous videos about the fact that rondel daggers aren't always a spike with a handle. They are sometimes edged in terms of being more like a knife. I'll look at the scabbard towards the end as well. This is an absolutely gorgeous blade Todd's got on this. So first of all, it's hollow ground, so it's actually a really light blade. It's incredibly light in the hand, but of course you get a lot of bang for your buck because you get rigidity as well. And if you look at the back of the blade, you can see it's fairly thick. I'll just do a quick measurement of that for you guys. It is 8mm. So it's 8mm thick at the spine, but has a really nice scooped hollow grind going to a really fine edge. So this type of knife absolutely could be used as a knife, you know, could be used for cutting quite effectively. And one of the things that marks it out as being earlier, or rather one of the tendencies of earlier rondel daggers, is you'll notice it has a rondel for a guard, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second, but a pommel at the back end. And this, funnily enough, seems to be what we see in Fiore de Liberi's treatise from around 1410. His rondel daggers have a disc here, but they have something like a little ball or a little pommel at the back end. So in fact, the type with two rondels, with two discs, seems to be, in general, seems to be a later, more of a 15th century thing. And if we're looking at the end of the 14th century and beginning of the 15th century, we tend to see more one rondel and a pommel. Also, the blade types don't necessarily change with time. It's not, don't think that we go from a knife blade with the earlier rondel daggers to a stabby, thin, pointy blade with the later rondel daggers. It doesn't go like that at all. In actual fact, in all the periods, in all the decades when the rondel dagger was used, we find both types of blade, or all types of blade, available. So hollow ground, non-hollow ground, cutting, you know, broader cutting types, thin spiky types, types with in fact more different types of cross section, triangular, square, all sorts, even lozenge shape and trapezoid shape. In actual fact, this is, you know, this is one type of blade you can find across a broad period of time, but with a hilt that roots it more in the end of the 14th, beginning of the 15th century. Beautifully made, as all of Todd's stuff is. To show you the hilt, I'm actually going to stick the scabbard on, because then it's easier to show you just the hilt. So the rondel is made up, as many originals were, with different elements. We've actually got a brass disc there, then a horn disc, then a brass disc again. So it's like a sandwich, or more like a hamburger in fact, isn't it? But this sandwich construction is not replicated by lower end, by cheaper rondel dagger or dagger manufacturers. I think in some cases, not necessarily because it's too expensive to replicate, but because they don't realise that that's how a lot of rondel daggers were actually made. If you want a nice thick disc, the standard way to do it in the medieval period is to make a sandwich construction. What you don't generally do is get a really thick piece of metal and cut a disc out of it, because then what you end up with is an overly heavy guard and an overly heavy dagger. And if you're wearing a dagger all the time, you don't want it to be heavier than it needs to be. And it doesn't increase its effectiveness as a rondel dagger. The effectiveness of the rondel dagger comes from the strength and robustness of the point and the rigidity of the blade and the disc. Now I'll just talk a little bit more about that disc. Why that disc? It's commonly called a guard, but I wouldn't personally define it as a guard. We call it a guard because it's in the position of a guard that would be on a knife or a sword, but it's not really there to protect your hand from other people's weapons like a sword guard might be. It's primarily, in my opinion, there to protect your hand from sliding downwards onto the blade. So it's quite similar in that sense, perhaps, to subas on things like wakizashis and stuff like this. It's not necessarily there to provide a lot of protection, but it does keep the hand secure. And in fact, there are modern chisels that actually have replicated this style of grip with a circular plate, if we call it that, rather than guard, that actually prevents the hand from moving anywhere. And when you think about how these rondel daggers were used, either point down or point up, it's with a huge amount of force, as much force as you can muster into a gap, like an armpit, for example, or a neck, you know, a junction at the bottom of a helmet, or the back of a knee joint, or inside of an elbow joint, or back of a gauntlet. You're often trying to get through, at the very least, padding and clothing, and at the most, you might be trying to get through mail in a gap between plate armour pieces. So you absolutely need a very, very strong and rigid blade, but you also need a very firm grip and way to prevent your hand from moving around and losing that grip. If we just look at the rest of the hilts, before there we go. It is a triangular section blade and with a sort of raised spine on the back, so you very much have to put it into the scabbard the right way around. It won't go the other way around. The grip is made of turned or lathed horn, absolutely beautiful. It actually reminds me of some 19th century French officers' sword grips. It's got a very, well, they're also made of horn, and they've got a very similar look to them. I absolutely loved ribbed grips. I know that you'll start making dirty jokes at this point, but ribbed grips, especially for something where you're stabbing a lot, give you great grip, really, really good grip, and they're going to prevent sliding around, so I really like that. Another way to think of it as well is if you're trying to access your weapon fighting in armour, if you're frantically feeling around for your dagger, you can't necessarily look downwards because you've got a big helmet on. That ribbed grip will enable you to get the thing out really quickly and easily with a very secure grip. And the pommel's beautifully done, cast brass, but then with, which in the period would be known as latten, or you could call this bronze, I don't know. Again, I don't know the exact chemical composition of it. With filed in, or perhaps even chiselled in this case, decoration in there that really captures the medieval aesthetic. And there's a really pleasing little ferrule, see if I can get it to focus, the ferrule at the bottom of the rondel there. Absolutely gorgeous thing. Just to finish off looking at the scabbards are 2 layers of leather, so we've got an internal leather scabbard and then an external leather scabbard stitched around it. So they're actually, even without the blade in, they're relatively rigid things. Beautifully made, keeps the blade nice and safe. Obviously you've got the end piece there that prevents, if you sat on it or something like that, prevents the point of the dagger or knife breaking through the leather or anything like this, and keeps that end nice and safe. Beautifully cast, again with additional, just put up there, additional either chiselled or filed. Let's have a look. Looks chiselled to me rather than filed. Decoration in the end there, and also incised, just try and get the camera to focus, there we go, incised decoration right the way up the leather on the outside, and then on the inside you've got the very nicely done stitching. Good sewing there, Todd. So there we go, another one of Todd's absolutely fantastic rondel daggers. Cheers folks. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, follow us on Facebook. You can buy t-shirts through Spreadshirt, support us on Patreon, or follow us on Pinterest. Thank you.